All right, folks. How's everybody doing? All right. I'm going to put this chair in here so I don't fall over. I have a feeling if I stand here, actually, I might be okay here. All right. Thanks a lot for sticking around. I can tell that I'm not nearly as popular as the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and I'm okay with that. So a couple of things that we want to talk about here. And again, my name is Chad Krieger. I'm from Central Analysis Bureau. And basically, I've been in the transportation industry most of my life. I grew up working on a farm. Due to Wisconsin ag exemption laws, I got to drive 18-wheelers pretty much all over the state at the age of 16. And I got to get the opportunity to operate commercial motor vehicles when I was in the military as well, too. From that standpoint, my focus has always been on the safety side of things when it comes to transportation. So injury prevention, crash prevention, all those types of things. My whole career, it's been working on the insurance agency side, consulting with motor carriers to figure out ways to understand their data, reduce their crashes, coach drivers, and all kinds of things like that. Also onto the insurance side of things as well, too. About 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to work for a company called Central Analysis Bureau. That's where I am now. And that's a company that focuses on motor carrier data. And one of the things that we focus on is roadside inspection information, publicly available information, and we use that information. We've been looking at motor carrier data for probably, our company has been around, it was founded in 1939. So, where'd you get the data from back then? Well, it was all mail-in stuff back in the old days. From the standpoint of that, one of the things that I'm here to talk about is we work with a lot of the different insurance companies that you folks work with on a regular basis. Those insurance companies look at that roadside inspection information very, very closely, whether it be the basics percentiles, the ISS values, the crashes, the inspections, the violations, whatever those things might be. I was actually asked to speak at this event by one of those insurers because they want you to understand the types of things that they're looking for. So as we're understanding those pieces of it, one of the things that my company, having worked with insurance companies over the years, we've had regular contact with motor carriers that will talk to their insurance agent, they'll talk to their insurance carrier, maybe the underwriter or something like that, and they will hear from them that, hey, we might not renew you, or we're not interested in looking at your business because of the cab report, or whatever it might be. And that's what we work with is the Central Analysis Bureau cab report. So we get motor carriers that reach out to us on a regular basis, and they want to understand what that cab report is and how to get the information. So years ago, we used to actually give that cab report to motor carriers. And what we found out was the motor carriers found that report to be pretty useful information, and all the FMCSA people have left. Obviously, that's information that you've got access to through the SMS, the safety measurement system. Get your PIN, you can look up your own information, all the basics percentiles are there, all the violations and so forth, the clean inspections and whatnot. All of that information is there. The trouble with it is it's not very actionable information. You're just getting kind of snapshots, you're getting a spreadsheet. And one of the things that we try to do, and that our users have told us, is that information is very useful. We can aggregate that information. And as we go through this presentation, we're going to talk about some of those things. And again, from the underwriting perspective, it's very important to understand that publicly available roadside inspection information, that is looked at not just by the insurance companies that are looking at writing your businesses. It's also looked at by truck leasing companies, freight factoring companies, freight brokers. They're looking at all of this information because it all has to do with risk assessment. Ultimately, underwriting is an educated guess based on available information. They're all trying to have predictive analytics. We live in a data gluttonous society, right? And having those different data sets that they can look at and understand what potentially would happen based on those points. Risk assessment, it's more than just crashes or scores, right? It's more than just that information. We've all heard about nuclear verdicts and things like that out there. Those basic scores, that those basics percentiles, those roadside inspections, those are all available through discovery in those court cases and generally come out at those times. Ultimately, better data allows for more refined analytics, and data allows for better risk mitigation. Believe it or not, everybody in this room is a risk manager of some kind. Whether you're a driver, a mechanic, a business owner, a dispatcher, you're dealing with risk your whole day. And this is part of what we want to talk about here. Data-based risk assessment principles apply to most aspects of not just the transportation or the trucking industry, it applies to almost every industry. Let me make sure I hit the right button. And again, there are sources for aggregating safety data. Like I said, we're Central Analysis Bureau. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration does it. Again, insurance carrier risk assessments. If you're the people that I mentioned earlier that I used to work with an insurance carrier, I was a loss control person. So if you're a business owner and the insurance person came and visits your business and tries to understand how many units you have and the age of your fleet and what your drug policies and things like that, I used to do that kind of thing. I appreciate it. I was only ever run off of one trucking company, which is great. Comprehensive vehicle and other driver data collection. Again, engine data, all those different kinds of things. Data usage is evolving. What's not changing is using the data to determine the safety culture and safety performance. That data is out there, it's staying. We know that I just had my youngest son turn 16 years old. We got a 2003 F-150 pickup truck with a big old chrome bumper that all three of my kids have driven. His insurance is way, way, way more expensive than mine, right? As it should have been, because he took that truck and rear-ended a contractor vehicle's hitch. Thankfully, it was a hitch on the back of a contractor vehicle, made a U-shape out of the bumper, so we're going to be paying more for that. But again, he's a new driver, and those are the types of things that they pay attention to. And they price based on hundreds of years of data, or 100 years of data for 16-year-old drivers. Same thing that we do with any other type of driver, motor carriers, or roofers, or anything like that. Risk enhancement, ultimately, whether you're looking at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, insurance, any other sort of business out there, the FMCSA focuses on targeted intervention. They collect the data in order to determine who are the organizations that need help, who needs the coaching, who needs the intervention. And ultimately, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's goal is crash reduction. Crash reduction. Insurance, similarly, they've got that same goal. They don't want to have any crashes, claim cost reduction, and then identifying the exposures. Identifying those exposures to be able to understand how should we price that particular risk, and understanding your data and correcting the issues that you have with that data can be very helpful in that process. Ultimately, mining available data to enhance safety and risk assessment is what we're looking for. Now, as far as an action plan is concerned, and I'm going to take a little bit here, and I'm going to talk about there's a number of areas or places that you can get your own data from, whether you're a single unit motor carrier with a DOT number, 5 units, 10 units, 1,000 units. The safety measurement system has the information out there and available for you to understand, or to at least get your basics percentiles. Understand what your violations are. We have a resource called MC Advantage. There's a couple of different ways to get a hold of that. We do have a no-cost version of it that we see ourselves as a way to be able to get that information into the hands of motor carriers. And there's a way that you can get that by going to our site. It doesn't cost anything. There's a higher value portion of that is available through a lot of insurance companies that you might be working with at no cost as well too. But ultimately, when we look at an action plan as far as the data is concerned, we want to focus on a couple of things. And understanding the available data will help provide some of the answers that we're looking for. Ultimately, an issue that no one is aware of will never be fixed. I can't tell you how many times we get called by motor carriers that are frustrated because they had an issue with whether it be their insurance or whatever else it might be, and it all boils down to their basics percentiles or the violations they had were outside of acceptable standards. We get those calls pretty frequently. And we take our part and we try to help that motor carrier understand that, hey, if you go to the SMS, you request your PIN, you can see this information, you need to pay attention to it. And we are constantly surprised. It's not just the brand new organizations that are coming to us with these issues. It's companies that have been around for decades in some cases and have 20, 30, 40 units on the road, and they're not paying attention to that roadside inspection information outside of the sheets that maybe get handed in or maybe never make their way, the white sheets that never get handed in. Simple scores, again, like the basic scores, dislikes the basic scores, and again, they're going to be changing here shortly. That is a simple way to understand and a simple way to monitor things. When we look at what's diagnosable, individuals won't be able to take any meaningful action, even if they're aware of the problem's existence, if they don't know what's causing the issue. And that's where mining, getting into the data, looking beyond the percentile values is so beneficial. Once an issue has been recognized, there needs to be a way to easily identify the specific behavior events that are the cause. An example of that is out-of-service tire violations. We all know that the industry on the vehicle maintenance side of things suffers from three main things, right? Brakes, lights, and tires, the BLT of the trucking industry. A couple of things to keep in mind that with that is there's all kinds of different tire violations, and this is a little bit hard to see here, but this is a donut graph that talks about the different types of violations as they relate to tires. And without having a way to dig into that data and mine into that data, identify those issues or behaviors that are controllable, right? If we're driving down the road and we pick up a nail, there's not a lot that we can do about that if we pull into a scale, right? However, if we leave in the morning and we've got a bald tire or our tread depth is too little or something to that effect, that is something that we should be able to coach to. And it isn't necessarily, I don't want to stand up here and have you guys thinking that all I'm doing is harping on the drivers. The way that they're changing the CSA is acknowledging that there are certain types of vehicle maintenance violations that the driver has direct control over, and certain vehicle maintenance issues that the motor carrier or fleet department has control over, okay? So again, keeping that in mind, root causes that are identifiable are only relevant if they're clear. So again, the SMS is great. You can see your basics percentiles. You pull a spreadsheet in. Now we got to slice and dice and do all kinds of tables. There's other ways to get that information, and a number of those ways don't cost anything. From there, a concise plan of action can be drawn up to address them. Otherwise, the issue could be chalked up to a cost of doing business. And again, as a loss control person who got to visit all kinds of motor carriers out there, one of the things that I did hear a lot about is that, hey, tires wear out, right? Tires wear out. So that's one way. You can accept it that way, but we can also dig into and identify what is the root cause of what's causing our basics percentile or our types of violations or what's causing us to get pulled over. Because if we recall, those basics percentiles feed into the inspection selection system, which is what the roadside inspectors use to determine if I'm going to be pulled in for an inspection. Okay, so those basic percentiles are very important. Ultimately, it also needs to be communicable, not like a disease, but like communication. No diseases here. Plans are great, but people need to be able to implement them until the stakeholders understand. And that's one of the biggest keys about it. The resources that are available out there, the resources that can be obtained out there, they're very helpful resources out there to be able to communicate to the fleet department, to the mechanics, to the driver, where their vehicle's issues are stacking up within the organization, to give them a clear picture as to what's going on with their daily process, which can then draw their attention to perhaps things that I could spend a little bit more time on. It goes up to the, it goes up to the fact that if you're not tracking it, if you're not aware of what the situation is, you're not able to correct it. And again, communicating those things to the stakeholders to help them understand what's going on can help us focus what we need to look at. Some things very simple. Like you got a baseball player. There's a hitting coach out there. You got a person who's been in the league for years, and all of a sudden, they're not hitting the ball well, and a coach can come in there and say, "Hey, hold your thumb like this," and all of a sudden, they're jacking homers again. And that's the kind of things that we can pay attention to. Coaching is, leaderships with the driver, the maintenance, dispatch. The whole organization has a say in that portion of the process. And ultimately, it needs to be valuable. Using that resource people will be encouraged to double down on a solution when they can look back on their previous issues and clearly see the results achieved. I think the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration guy got me sick. Which will incentivize further action. I've talked to so many motor carriers out there that they just, as an insurance person or whoever, I came out and I was explaining to them and talked to them about the safety measurement system and their basics percentiles and the violations that they're having, and having motor carriers throw their hands up in the air and say, there's nothing I can do about it. Excuse me. There's nothing that I can do about it. And ultimately, if you're just paying attention to the top line issues, it does become very overwhelming. So finding ways to dig into the details a little bit can really find some of that low-hanging fruit that can help us resolve some of those issues. Use that data to identify objective key performance indicators. Again, identifying, hey, we've got a lot of tire violation issues. Well, what type of issues are those? And focusing your behaviors, your coaching, your training. If you've got an incentive plan for your drivers and your dispatchers and your mechanics out there, use those types of things to be able to say, hey, we are focusing on this type of X, this type of violation, this type of regulation, whatever it might be able to take the biggest bite out of that apple to be able to reduce that exposure. This is just an example of our dashboard. We've got the basics percentiles and things like that there. And one of the things, and we'll see if the laser works here. It does not. If you look on the left side, there's a stoplight there. And ultimately, based on the percentiles, that stoplight is what determines whether you get pulled into a scale or pulled over and inspected on the roadside. So this motor carrier is at a red. They're at inspect. We would prefer that they were in a yellow, which is optional, or a green that's passed, or a green that is pass. But ultimately, those percentiles feed into those scores. As you see, this is another example. Looking beyond those scores to find the solutions, this is a motor carrier that's paid attention to the issues that they've had. Their ISS value has dropped below into the green, so now they're pass. They're spending less time being pulled over because when the roadside inspector punches in this company's DOT number, quite literally a stoplight shows up in that roadside inspector's tough book. It says green. They move on to somebody else unless they see something visually wrong with the truck or the driver. Okay? So those are the things, being able to dig into those data points to be able to understand and identify those things. So using our own data with the MC Advantage resource that we have, one of the things that we've got a data scientist that works with us. So one of the things that we did is we looked at the industry compared to folks that use, again, the only data that we have to compare this to is our own data, the MC Advantage. But this tells you how the scores improve when you're paying attention to the data. All right? And like I said, I cannot tell you how many motor carriers are out there that have never logged into the SMS to even see what their basic scores are or what their violations might be. That's all. There's no cost for any of that stuff. But as we can see here, unsafe driving basic is 24% better than the industry when you're paying attention to the data. Hours of service is over 35% better than the industry average. Driver fitness is 30, controlled substance is over 20. Vehicle maintenance is even pretty good there at 13% better. And then again, paying attention to the crash there, hazmat's a little bit lower there. But again, it's an example of data that we have that tells you if you're paying attention to that information, just trying to keep track of my time here, so that you can address those situations. And all of these things, correcting those basics percentiles, looking beyond the scores, addressing those underlying low-hanging fruit items are going to benefit you on the dollar side of things because it's going to pull you out of those alerts. It's going to take those alerts and it's going to weigh less into the inspection selection system. It's going to give you less opportunities to be pulled over. One of the things that people out there pay attention to, whether they be insurers or anybody else, is how often are you inspected? How much time does it take for you to be inspected? And different data points like that. And that has a lot to do with other things. Making us late. Deliveries can potentially be late. Cargo at rest is cargo at risk. Those types of things out there as well too. So again, using that information, leveraging the industry data to build a safer, more profitable fleet, create that 360-degree view of your overall operations and safety, enable that risk-based analysis, and that's a big term there, right? You don't have to be a data scientist to do this. Risk-based analysis and decision-making support. That's kind of marketing mumbo-jumbo there. But basically, look at what's driving your scores and use that information to make decisions on how you can operate your fleet better, on how you can be careful, identify the low-hanging fruit, and deliver accurate insight into driver performance and training. Again, if we're seeing that we've got a particular type of violation that's very common, I used to speak at driver safety meetings all the time. I love speaking at driver safety meetings, although the drivers in here might not enjoy it. But regardless, I would always love talking to them. And one of the things that would happen is a motor carrier, 2 days before the safety meeting, would call me up and say, okay, Chad, what are we talking about? What do you want to talk about? And honestly, one of the first things I would do is go to the cab report and try to understand what's driving our scores so we can address those kind of things. That shouldn't be coming from your insurance company loss control guy. Guide asset management and winning competitive strategies and drive more profitable, high-performance safety issues. And a nice quote here that we were able to pull out here is, safety is foundational. I mentioned it from the get-go. I'm a safety guy. If you put safety first and in genuine and an organic way, your employees will know that they come first and that they are cared for. Safety is one of those main needs of being a human. We need to feel safe. And that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we're able to focus on here as well, too. A couple of other things that I wanted to make sure and touch on since I volunteered to do this presentation. The CSA prioritization preview has come out. I wanted to make sure that we'd save some time to address that. Who here has heard of the CSA prioritization preview? Raise your hand. All right, a couple of us here. So one of the things that they're doing here is they're changing the way the CSA basics are, the percentiles are being done. In fact, they're renaming some things. They're making some adjustments out there. And that's got a lot to do with the industry out there communicating with the FMCSA about changes that they'd like to see. A lot of the biggest, OIDA, ATA, a number of the organizations are paying attention to those things, and they're doing a good job. And the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is trying to pay attention to those things. Ultimately, the proposed changes with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration CSA resource, they're evolutionary. They're not revolutionary. What we need to remember is that the roadside inspections, there's nothing changing with that, right? The roadside inspectors, the CVSA people, the way they collect that, how they, when they pull people over, when they do the inspections, none of that data collection piece is changing. What's changing is the methodology, how they're calculating their percentiles. That's what's changing to react to what the industry is looking for. Since its inception, FMCSA has continuously updated its CSA methodology. I'm going to probably show my age a little bit here, but does anybody remember that when CSA first came out, that there was a load securement basic? Does anybody, I see a couple of heads nodding up and down. That didn't last very, that didn't last very long, but it was a thing and it was out there and everybody hated it because everybody was, load securement basic was, it seemed like everybody's load securement basic was in alert constantly. The Federal Motor Carrier Administration at the time listened to that, they crunched some numbers, they ended up putting that into vehicle maintenance. Are we still getting load securement violations? Yes. However, it's not creating all the hubbub that was there before because they put it into one of the other basics. So that's some of the things that they're doing here as well. This has been changing. CSA 2010, which should actually be 2011 because it actually didn't come out until 2011, but continuous improvement and increasing safety. One of the things that I want to point out, we're going to talk about some of the changes here. We've got about 5 minutes left, but the very bottom is a link here. Submit your comments. Learn about this information. Google CSA prioritization review. Look up what your information would look like compared to the way it is today and the way it will be ultimately, the way it looks now, the way that they're doing it may change a little bit. But regardless, this is your time to comment on that. The only thing the FMCSA is required to do when it comes to these processes is they must read all of the comments, okay? I've commented on different things. Anybody can comment on them. I encourage you to get in there and make your voice heard. A couple of things. They're going to revise some of the safety categories. They used to be called basics. Nobody really knew what that stood for. I deal with it every day. I have a hard time remembering it. Basics, analytics, safety, basics, analysis, safety, whatever. Inspection categories. Now they're changing it to just safety categories. Unsafe driving is going to include substance and alcohol violations. So those of you that maybe work with an organization that run a temperature in the substance abuse kind of things, kind of similar to the load securement piece, they're going to put that into unsafe driving. Vehicle maintenance, driver observed versus vehicle maintenance. Driver observed are violations that would reasonably be observed by a driver or detected as part of a walk-around level 2 roadside inspection. So things that you should probably be able to see on your walk-around pre- and post-trip inspection, right? They're not going to have you pull the wheels off and check the brake pads or the brake drums or anything like that, but they do think it's things that a driver should be able to see. And to me, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. What's not changing? The crash indicator, hazmat compliance, hours of service, driver fitness, those aren't changing. Again, roadside violations, collection-wise, nothing's changing. There's 959 violations. They're going to add 14 more violations. They're going to organize those all into 116 violation groups. As an example, hours of service requirements is going to be a violation group. It replaces the 1 to 10 weighting scale, which caused a lot of people to have issues with it. A speed 4 violation was a 10. A seatbelt violation was 7. People are like, why is a seatbelt violation 7? That doesn't cause a crash, right? Seatbelt violations, though, are one of those things that indicate safety culture. The following violations would receive a severity weight of 2. So basically, everything is going to be a 1, unless it's an out-of-service violation or a driver disqualifying violation. So they're 1 or 2. 1 or 2. No more 1 to 10. It's 1 or 2. Adjusting the intervention thresholds. They're basically increasing the intervention thresholds. That way it creates an opportunity where they're still focusing on the motor carriers that need the help, but they're causing less static with the motor carriers that aren't going to be part of that process. So the number of those things are going to increase. And then there's going to be the safety event groups where they're proposing replacing safety event groups with proportionate percentiles. So right now we've got the 5 peer groups in the system. Again, not to get too deep into the weeds here. That is one of the reasons why I'm where I'm at now, because I was trying to explain to the motor carriers that I worked with, why does your basics percentile have this wild swing? And it was because they were going between their peer groups. So again, it's going to be another thing that they're working towards addressing in order to take care of those items. And then increased scrutiny of recent violations. It retains the SMS data sufficiency standard for unsafe driving and extends the same standard. So what that means is if you're a motor carrier and you haven't had a violation for the last 12 months, SMS data is 24 months. If you haven't had a violation, even if you're in an alert threshold or you have a high basics or a high basics percentile, if you go for a year without a violation, your percentile is going to go away. So it gives you that opportunity that if you get things cleaned up in 12 months, that it's going to basically take your percentile score away, which is, again, something that they always did with unsafe driving, but they're going to extend that to the others as well, too. Utilization factors, again, getting into a little bit of the weeds here, I do encourage you to take a look at this information yourself, but they're bumping that up by 50,000 miles. And then, again, new segmentation for a couple of the different things. Hazmat compliance by cargo versus non-cargo trailers, or cargo tank versus non-cargo tank trailers, and then driver fitness. And again, ultimately, I wanted to make sure that we address some of those things in case that was the first time that you heard those things. But ultimately, believe it or not, safety pays. Access your motor carrier information, whether you do it through one of the resources with the motor carrier an advantage resource, or you get it from the safety measurement system, or maybe your business partners on the agency and the carrier side of things. Understand what your information is and what your data is. That way you can make those better decisions each and every day within your organization. And I think I'm out of time. Thank you. Thank you very much.